Well, hi, Stu Bamey coming to you from Pawleys Island, South Carolina. You know, my wife and I just got back from our Luther tour, took in a busload of people to study Martin Luther and the Holocaust, and ended up in Nuremberg with the war trials. It's just an absolutely amazing trip. After the trip, my wife had always wanted to go to Salzburg, which is just a short train ride from Munich, where we end our trip at Oktoberfest. And so we hopped on a train on a Sunday morning and went over to Salzburg to stay for 3 days because she wanted to take the Sound of Music tour. I had never seen The Sound of Music, but my wife, she watches it 2 or 3 times every Christmas at least. She's probably seen it 30 or 40 times, knows every song, every act that's going to come up, everything that's going to happen. So here I am on this 5-hour traveling from place to place where the movie was filmed, Sound of Music tour. When we got on the bus, the leader of the trip, the guide, said, "Now, how many of you have never seen The Sound of Music?" And I raised my hand, and I was the only hand on the bus. There were people on the bus dressed up, women dressed up as nuns for the scenes in the movie. There were adults dressed up as the children in the movie, even Julie Andrews. I mean, it was just crazy. And from place to place to place, we sang the songs of The Sound of Music, which I didn't know any of them except for Do, Re, Mi. I knew a little bit about that song. About the third stop, I went up to the guide on our way back to the bus, and I said, "Hey, are there any golf courses around here? Because I don't know anything about The Sound of Music." It's interesting that film, they had no idea what a worldwide success that was going to be for generations of people. They had absolutely no idea that it was going to grow and still be seen by so many people today. It was filmed back in the 60s, and it's still around today. As I said, my wife watches it. I'm probably the only person I've met that hasn't seen The Sound of Music. Well, I started to watch a little bit of it, and it's really, really good. But the point is that we often don't know what's going to happen in the future. They thought that was going to be a relatively small niche film. It's filmed in Austria, Salzburg, Austria. Most people have never been there. They didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal, but it still is. But at the time of its filming, they never thought it was going anywhere. Sound of Music. They just didn't know what the future had in store or what was ahead for them. And most of us don't know what's in store for the rest of our lives. It's hard for us to see that God's hand is leading and guiding and directing in our lives when he seems to be silent. I often say that God is silent, but he's never still. Beneath the surface of what we see is the invisible hand of God. That's why Paul, the apostle, said, "Walk by faith and not by sight," because our sight is not always an accurate reflection of what's happening in reality. And so we've been looking at the Apostle Paul. I want to introduce him to you. He's the most significant Christian who's ever lived, more important than Peter, James, John, you name it. It's the Apostle Paul. He interpreted Christianity for us under the leadership and the power and the directing of the Holy Spirit. And there was a time in his life when he didn't know where he was headed, but God beneath the surface was leading, directing, and guiding his life. And he didn't really understand that. I mean, I want you to know that no matter where you find yourself or what's happening to you right now or where you've been or how discouraged you are, God is alive and active and engaged and leading and guiding your life. And as we move forward in life, it will become clear to us how he does that. And there's no better example of that than the Apostle Paul. That's why I want to introduce Paul to you. And I've been introducing him to you in the last message by way of an acronym. An acronym are letters of the alphabet that represent certain ideas in a way that's easy for us to remember. And I'm going to give you this acronym of the Apostle Paul, and I believe that you'll never forget it. You will remember it the rest of your life. In the last message, we used P to stand for Paul, the polluted, where we see the goodness of God. In this message, I want to use A to stand for the apostle, where we see the guidance of God. There's U, the uncompromising Paul, and there's L, the loving Paul. We'll look at those in our messages to come. But in this message, I want us to look at how God directed and guided the apostle Paul by looking at the 3 names of Paul. So let's look at how God guided and led and directed this man by the name of Paul through the 3 names that he has in the New Testament and one title, which we'll talk about in the next message. Remember, one man in 10 years, the Apostle Paul, traveled 10,000 miles by foot and by ship to spread the gospel to the known world. One man took the gospel out of Israel and spread it through the whole world, this one man. And the way that he did that was by seeing that God had uniquely prepared and led and directed and guided him. And I want you to understand how God did that in his life, and God promises to do that in our lives as well. So let's look at Galatians chapter 1, verse 1, where Paul writes, Paulos apostolos in the Greek. Paulos apostolos. Now, these are the names of Paul. The first name of Paul is the Greek name Paulos, which he uses here in Galatians 1:1. He is a Hellenist. Hellenist means one who follows the classical Greek style. If you recall, between 600 and 300 BC, it was the height of the Greek culture. If you've been to Athens or to Greece, you see how powerful and how magnificent that culture was. The art, the literature, the philosophy, the theater, the architecture, the music, the math, the science. I mean, it was the highest that it's possibly ever been in the history of the world. It was absolutely amazing. Now, by the time of the Roman Empire, 300 years later, the Romans had this tremendous interest in reviving the classical Greek age of Alexander the Great. Remember him, the son of Philip of Macedon, the great conqueror of the world. He was a great Hellenist, and he spread the classical Greek thought and literature and architecture and art and philosophy throughout the world, so that by the time of the Roman Empire, it's built in place, and the Romans adopted this classical Greek age. So Paul is steeped in classical Greek education and culture. So he has a Greek name. Paul writes in Acts 21:39, Paul answered, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Well, what's he mean by all this? He wants us to tell us about this no ordinary city. Tarsus was the capital of the Roman province of Cilicia. It was a fortified city. It was a major trade route between Syria and Asia Minor. It was a high plain known for its trade and its Hellenistic culture, the Hellenistic culture of the classic Greek age. And there was a great university there founded by Alexander the Great, one of the greatest universities in the world. So Paul is in a place of enormous Greek culture. It was said of Paul that he was one of the greatest writers of all Greek literature and unsurpassed in magnitude of his knowledge. It was even said of Paul, if he had not been converted, he would have surpassed Plato in the breadth of his thought. He was a veritable genius, and he was schooled in classical thought. You see, God was leading, directing, and guiding Paul as a child and as a student to be born in Tarsus, a Roman city, under the finest education, Greek classical education available. God's guiding him, but he doesn't see it beneath the visible surface of what Paul can see. He doesn't know God is taking him somewhere that he has no idea exists. Then you might be interested to know his Latin name, his Roman name, Paulus with a U-S. He is a citizen of the Roman Empire. As we mentioned, he's already been born and educated in Tarsus. It's been said there were three great civilizations in the history of the world. In the 1700 BC's Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi, 600s Greece, Athens, and then in 31 BC, the Roman Empire. Augustus is the one that we look at the birth of Jesus. It was the golden age of Rome. It's the fullness of time that Paul is born into. It's the first time that the world has been united. Its currency, its legal system, its transportation. It's all united together, one government under Rome at the time that Jesus was born. Paul calls it the fullness of time. Now, let's look at what Paul says in Acts 22, verse. Now, let's look at what it says about Paul in Acts 22:27. The commander went to Paul and asked, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes, I am," he answered. Well, what's happening here? Well, Paul is arrested in Jerusalem, and the centurion soldier wants to flog him for the trouble he's been making. But Paul appeals to his Roman citizenship. He wants a fair public trial. He knows that he can't be punished or executed as a Roman citizen. So how can you tell that somebody in those days was a Roman citizen, by the way? Well, you carried a little stone tablet around with you with a seal on it of where you were born. So Paul's little tablet was sealed in Tarsus, claiming citizenship in Tarsus. Well, you say, well, you could make those up or you could buy them on the illegal market. You know, well, yeah, but if you were caught faking your citizenship, you were dead. You were a dead man. No one dared to fake Roman citizenship. Too many soldiers around, too many officials. If they caught you and if they found that your identification wasn't really a Roman citizen, you were toast. So Paul says, I'm a Roman citizen. Well, how did a Jew, Paul's Jewish, we'll see that in a minute, living in Tarsus, become a Roman citizen? How did a Jewish family become citizens of Rome? Well, we think that he did something, his family did something extremely significant for the Roman Empire. His family was a family of tent makers, makers of fine linen and flax. It was said of the linen of Tarsus that it surpassed the linen of even Athens in luxury. They had the absolute finest linen and flax. And they would take this linen and they would make fine tents out of it. This is not your camping tent from Dick's Sporting Goods, you know, from Coleman Camping. No. These are traveling luxury living houses. Think of the tents that you might see of the sheiks in Arabia out in the desert. They are of outstanding quality and the highest luxury. And what happened is that Paul's family knows how to make these tents. And these tents were so valued by the Roman Empire. They were of such service to the Roman Empire, that they were made to be citizens. God had been leading, directing, and guiding through his family and through their vocation, Paul to have Roman citizenship. He has a Roman name. You see, Peter and James and John couldn't travel. They couldn't get outside of Israel. They just simply couldn't do it. They didn't have the passport, but Paul did. Paul could travel all the way to Rome or even to Spain as he told us he wanted to eventually end up. Paul could travel anywhere he wanted. He was unique from all of the followers of Jesus at this time who were in a leadership position. So it's the first time in the history of the world that it's united under one government, one law, one language, one currency, one system of transportation. And Paul is a Roman citizen of this empire. Then finally, there's Paul's Hebrew name, Saul. He is a Hebrew of the Hebrews. He is named after the first king of Israel, King Saul. On his defense on the stairs of the Antonia fortress in Jerusalem, it's written of him in Acts 22:3. Paul says, I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia. Making two facts here. I'm Jewish, but I was born in Tarsus, the Roman city of Cilicia, the great city of Cilicia. But I was brought up in this city of Jerusalem. I studied under Gamaliel. I was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison. Yeah, my early years were spent in Tarsus, my early education, I got that classical Greek training. Then my parents sent me to Jerusalem to study under the great Gamaliel, the great Jewish scholar, the head of the Sanhedrin. I mean, my credentials are impeccable. I was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. I was steeped in Orthodox Judaism, trained in classical Greek Hellenism, steeped in Orthodox Judaism. And then I was handpicked to lead the persecution. I persecuted the followers of what he called this way. The way, or the followers of the way, were what the early Christians were called. They weren't called Christians until later by the Roman Empire. They were called the followers of the way of Jesus. And I persecuted them to death, men and women. I sent them into prison, into concentration camps like Nazi Germany. I was a terrible man. I was a terrorist. We talked about this in Paul the Polluted. He was known as a terrorist of the day. What changed the life of this man? Well, God had prepared him. He had led him. He had guided him every step of the way. He had three names. The Greek name, Paulos, classical Greek Hellenism. His Roman name, Paulos. I can travel anywhere. I'm a Roman citizen from Tarsus in Cilicia. My Hebrew name, Saul, the first king of Israel, studied under the great Gamaliel. Paul, therefore, is, listen to this, he is fluent in Greek, Latin, Aramaic, and Hebrew. He is the one who is responsible for changing the Christian language from the Aramaic language of the fishermen of Galilee, the common language of the Galileans, and he changed that from Aramaic, the Christian language, into Greek so that it could spread throughout the Hellenistic world of the Roman Empire. See, Paul changed the Christian language from Aramaic to Greek so that all people could read it in the nation, the empire of Rome, throughout the Mediterranean world. Paul was born to be great, but not as a Greek or a Roman or as a Hebrew, but as a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, if God can lead, direct, and guide the life of the Apostle Paul, he can certainly lead, guide, and direct your life and mine. Question: where is God beneath the visible surface of what we see, of reality as we perceive it? Where's the invisible hand of God working in your life? Well, we have to trust him. We have to trust him. As I look back over my past, I became a Christian in young life. That youth ministry has served me well throughout all of my ministry life. I went to a great seminary. I did learn Greek and Hebrew. That served me so well. But I studied under some of the finest mentors that America had to offer theologically and philosophically. All of that at the time, it didn't all make sense, but now I can see that God was carefully leading and guiding and directing and training and preparing me. God's always leading and guiding us, even in our darkest moments, even in the valleys. God is leading, guiding, and directing. In fact, I've just been through some pre-marriage counseling with two young couples. It's really fun to do pre-marriage counseling. If you know somebody needs some pre-marriage counseling, I love to do that. I've got 20 questions I've developed, and I love to take these kids through that and get to know them and ask them some really tough questions on this side of marriage that I sit on. But I can tell, I tell them, you guys, you're going to face this prosperity stuff. They all hear about that. Yeah, love him in prosperity, for better, in health. They don't hear the sick or the poor or the adversity side of things. But Jesus said life will bring you trouble and adversity. It does. But God uses that adversity, as he used it in Paul's life, to lead him and to guide him and to shape him and to prepare him for the next event that was about to take place in his life. God is the great composer of our lives. Susan and I went to the Vienna State Opera House to see the Marriage of Figaro. I love opera. I don't know a lot about it, but I love it because it's a combination of acting and singing and orchestras and sets. It's the whole complete deal. Love the Marriage of Figaro, written by Mozart. It's complex. It's intricate. It's simple. It's beautiful. But the point is this: it takes a genius to compose that music. The orchestra is playing, the people are singing, there's a book of the words that they're going to speak and do, the story they're going to tell. There's the beautiful sets. There's all of this preparation, an opera house. All so that someone who is a great composer can compose and turn the basic scales of the do, re, mi, of the sound of music into something beautiful. God is the great composer of our lives. He knows what's best for us. He has a good plan in mind for us. He wants to guide us like he did Paul. Now, sometimes we can't see that, but when we can't see it, we are to trust him, just to trust him. He knows what he's doing with your life this very moment. Michelangelo, the great Renaissance painter and sculptor and architect and inventor and designer, was standing in front of a large block of marble. He had been standing and staring at that block of marble for 4 years. Never touched it. One day, one of his apprentices came to him and said, "Master, what are you doing? Why are you just staring at that block of marble? You've been looking at it for 4 years." And he responded, "There's an angel inside that block of marble. I'm just trying to figure out how to set the angel free." There's something wonderful and beautiful inside every single one of us. And God is preoccupied with setting that which is beautiful inside of us to set it free. Do you feel right now like there's something beautiful inside of you? There is. You've been created by the God of the universe. He handcrafted, shaped, molded you and me. Yeah. He sees in us everything that's beautiful. He wants to set that free. Let him do that. Trust him. Take to him your greatest needs this very moment and release them to him and let him set you free. Let him set you free. Paul, the apostle, the guidance of God. And hey, I hope this message has meant something to you. Hit subscribe if you want to subscribe, or get on our email list. Please get on our email list. Go to our website and jump on it and just type in your name and address. You can unsubscribe at any time, but get on our email list. There's things that we have coming up, and I want you to get to be an insider and find out what's going on. I send out an email every single week. If you don't like it, just unsubscribe, but get on our email list. And thank you for your contributions. It allows us to keep this ministry going in all of its aspects. God bless you, and may you know God's guidance in your life today.